everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today, we are really lucky to have this beautiful, beautiful book, To Heal a Wounded Heart, with Pilar Jennings, Dr. Pilar Jennings. The transformative power of Buddhism and psychotherapy in action. So welcome.
Thank you, CJ. It's good to be here with you.
So do you think that this is your life mission and trying to knit these two things together? I wonder, like, do you think that this is, if you have a mission on earth, this is one of them?
I do find that it's a primary mission for me to somehow let these two very different traditions, right, these healing methods that have totally different origins and cultural contexts, dance together, not become merged, but just to be in a lively conversation.
Isn't that beautiful? Because I think about your background, because you're an anthropologist, is that right? An anthropologist who then started going into psychology. So is that right? Your background is in anthropology?
Yeah, I started grad school studying medical anthropology, and so that was the original idea, was to study pain and suffering at a distance.
Mm.
And the more I studied, the more I felt that I needed to participate. It wasn't all right to be learning about how we suffer, even though I had my own personal suffering, but to be studying in a clinical way without getting in there and doing what I could to participate in alleviating it.
I'm sorry for my ignorance about your field. When you say doing it in a clinical way, I just imagine like you observing behind a window, or like looking at lab rats. Is that what you mean by a clinical way?
Basically, yes. To,
Okay.
to be protected, to somehow create a boundary. And academia is both a way to understand the human condition more fully and to be protected from it. So for me
Wow, fascinating.
personally, yeah, I felt called to both study and get involved as a clinician, as a therapist.
Wow, that's really profound because it's a parallel with your book, right? You're kind of looking at, in the Buddhist big picture way at kind of like clinical, high level, meta, kind of looking at it in a detached way, and then like, no, I'm here with you. It's interesting that you're even the way that you've approached your mission is this at these two levels of like going down deep and digging through the dirt. It feels like when I'm reading this book.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You're exactly right. That's one of the interesting differences between these two traditions. And in psychotherapy, the idea is to really get close to somebody and try to understand the details of what an individual has lived through and is still living through. And in Buddhism, we learn to see a much bigger picture, to
Mm.
essentially zoom out, get less identified with our personal experience, not in a dissociative way, but in a way that frees us up from feeling personally done to.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge because there the thing that I keep on getting confused about personally, like when I look at, I've talked to all these spiritual teachers and people from all different angles. I'm looking at this in every single possible angle with my show. And it seems on one level, I have people like Thomas More and people who talk about soul contracts. And it's this idea that we come in, I guess I would say it from a Shaivite tradition is that we start from the one, and then the one comes and has these multiplicity of manifestations of individual consciousness called me, CJ Liu, in a body as an individual point, right? So there's the individual, and then there's the collective from which I came from, and I
Mhm.
get the sense that there's these two ways of two frames that you're looking at simultaneously, right? And if you look at the individual or one, the question is how do you know when you've gone too deep on either? Is that like if you think about things from a dualistic perspective, we are both individual and we are one. So how do we know when we are polarized in one and not necessarily getting the merits of that one? Like if I could perseverate about therapy and think about like, I don't like this mole on my face. Can we talk about it? You know?
That's a pitfall.
Yeah. Yeah. Or how can you go into like, I am one? You know, I also talk to people who are like, have this big white robe and I'm like walking through the, lunchroom and I am one with God. I'm like, so why are you even here on this planet? Just go immediately.
Right.
Like, what are you even here for? Go, if you don't want to be with us. So what's your sense, since you've been studying this for a while, about this dance between the two, and how would you describe kind of theoretical and then your own personal journey?
Well, I find that both of these traditions have incredible healing potential, but they both also have these pitfalls that you just lay out so well, so clearly. And what I have found both personally and as a clinician is a feeling of aliveness, a feeling of wellness seems to come from a balance between really allowing for the truth of our subjective experience, getting to know it, with the ethical intention, though, of being a more conscious person, a more sensitive person who can equally make that room for other people and their subjectivity.
Yeah, so I get it. That's an interesting way of putting it. So yeah, that's really interesting. So it's like, how can we not be narcissistic? Like, do you like what I'm wearing? What do you think about this? I'm here to talk to you about, this little mole on my face. So it's, yes, you're having a subjective experience, but how can this actually not get too over the top to the point of narcissism, right?
Right.
And then can you go to the collective? It's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
And both, no, that's all right. No, I think about these issues quite a bit, and people like Carl Jung are helpful. And now more recently, Anne Ulanov, who's a great Jungian scholar, that our personal experience, our subjective reality is our inroad to the collective. Right? It's our tiny but very important manifestation of larger categories of experience. And so if we can really appreciate that what we go through personally is a way to understand the human condition, to understand our friend, our partner, our teacher, then we're using it for the greater good, for collective healing.
That's interesting. So when we actually I love that idea of I can go straight to the top, right? No, I can't go straight to the I've been desperately trying and I can't. And I think it's because but let's say that we go straight to the top and we are like, I am convening one with God. I am one with God. I'm enlightenment. And you can't relate to other people. Then
right.
That's what I'm hearing you say. Like, why are you here on earth then? Like, just like I said,
Yeah.
go back, go on the bullet train up to heaven and don't come back. Like, why are you that's my bitchy side, my bitchy East Coast side.
This is an important point.
Yeah.
That we can hide in our spirituality as well. We can hide in oneness or the sense of loving everybody rather than risking loving somebody in particular, rather than really being in person-to-person relationship with all of that risk and tumult. So
yeah, you talked about vulnerability. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have found that part of being a person means coping with extraordinary vulnerability. And for many of us, especially if we've suffered early in life, it's something we learn to defend against, something we learn to get distance from. And one way to do that is to coast on a spiritual plane and never really land anywhere. And I don't say that to in any way pathologize spirituality, because it's a huge part of my life and I understand it to be health giving, right? Mental health giving. But it has its pitfalls, its places of hiding.
There's this wonderful. I got one listener question that I promised to get to. They're asking to go
Sure.
back. How do we come up with the balance? But I wanted to go. I found this passage so interesting. You're talking to your Lama. Tell me the name, Lama Pema?
Yeah, Lama Pema.
Should I say Lama Pema La? I don't know. Okay.
Some people call him Lama La,
Okay, Lama
which
La.
just means dear teacher. But his name is Pema, so Lama Pema.
Lama Pema. Okay,
Mhm.
so you're talking to him, and you're talking about your relationship with your mom, and he goes to you and says, "Let this go, Pilar. Let this
Mhm.
go," as if to indicate that it was my mind that had generated the problematic feelings, not an actual encounter. From this point of view, I was making up a story about who she was and sticking to it. This is the whole Buddhist, right? It's all a story. You've made up this whole idea. I could
Mhm.
accept that, but I also had feelings about the relationship. And while it was true that feelings were impermanent, excuse me, they also revealed influential dynamics in a person's relational history. They could be appreciated more fully. They could be, in this way, they could be appreciated more fully, being let go of. Doing so was a way to get to know oneself and others better. There's more to being curious about our feelings than misguided attachment, which I thought, wow, this is so interesting. So he's telling you to let it go in this passage.
Mhm.
And then in the chapters later, he meets your mom and he's like, oh, I get it.
That's basically what happened. Yes, years later, after trying to convince me that I could practice more fully, and then I wouldn't be so pissed. Yes.
I was reading this and I just, first of all, I just love this whole passage.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So I think because it does such a beautiful job that you've written that explains this dilemma.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed and just deeply appreciated my relationship with Lama Pema, who's my dear friend and my teacher. In part because we can have these discussions and these conflicts around what frees us up.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm a psychotherapist, I often try to convince him that we need to explore our personal experience and our feelings more fully in order to be truly freed up. That if we don't
Mm.
do that, often we're defending against what feels too dangerous to face into directly, or we evacuate it and project it onto others.
Mm.
We get pulled into depression.
Yeah.
Often he'll say, no, that's wrong, wrong, and wrong, until I keep at it, and then he'll say, you might have a point, which is essentially what happened around my mother.
Yeah, that's the best that you can get. Okay, so all right, so what I love, there's a passage in here later in the chapters where he starts talking about his own mom, and you I don't know if you hypothesize or both of you conclude that it could be a projection, right? He lost his own mom, so during the I guess the Chinese invasion of Tibet. Is that when that happened, or I'm not sure
After, yeah, when they were in a refugee camp, and there was a lot of illness.
Okay, so he loses his mom, and so
Mhm.
and so you hypothesize that maybe it's like a loss of his own mom, and so there's this kind of like, why aren't you just happy that you have a mom, you know? And so then he starts revealing his personal story about his own mom, and and what were the conclusions that he came to after sharing his own personal story, and do you feel like it freed him?
Well, I hope that in some way it offered him a space to speak to speak more spontaneously about very personal experiences, because something that frequently happens to spiritual teachers, especially if they're monastics, they come from
Mm.
a monastic culture, is this expectation that they should have transcended all personal suffering.
Mm.
But many are carrying serious trauma history,
Mm.
and just by nature of being a person,
Right.
they have suffering, they have trauma. And because they're seen as someone who should be on the other side of suffering, often no one really asks them about what they've been through,
Mm. Yeah.
or
So
not in much detail.
right, because it's a story, it's content, and therefore needs to be just kind of, you know, I'm feeling sad. I'm mindful that I'm sad. I'm not going to water the seeds of sadness because then those seeds will grow and populate and, pollute my mind full of, angry, sad thoughts. I mean, that's at least my understanding of Buddhism. Is that what
That's
his thought
right.
is? Yeah.
To let the content dissolve of its own accord, which is a lovely practice, but that's different from repressing or splitting off from content that really needs care.
So, how do you know, going back to the listener question, how do you know if you're repressing and fast forwarding past something that really needs care, or if it's a story and you need to just let it go?
It's a great question, CJ. There are indicators that when we're trying to push something down, right, into the unconscious, out of awareness, we'll typically notice it through compulsive behaviors, our addictions, feeling
Mm.
compelled to do things or say things or feel things that the conscious part of us would not wish for.
Ah, okay.
So
Okay.
it's almost the unconscious showing itself, right,
Ah,
through something really vexing.
yes, I see. Got it. So it could be I'm sitting there scooping the next scoop of Haagen-Dazs going, wait, wait, what's happened? Or, going through compulsively my email because I'm just nervous about something about my email. All of those are text, or I've got to check my text, or, in the middle of the night, all those kinds of things. Maybe compulsions that mean that I'm stuffing or repressing down things that I don't like. So that's my signal. If I'm feeling like I have an addiction or compulsion, is that one way that I know that I need to go in there? I can't just feeling tense. Whoop, go up the
Mhm.
train, go up the spiritual train. Let it
Right,
go.
right.
Okay. What are some other signals, or are those the main ones?
Those are good, strong ones. Our dreams are also, as Freud told
Mm.
us all, so illuminating, right? Because there's all sorts of fantasy and feeling and longing that might be
Mm.
hard to consciously access, but it comes up in these wild dreams.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
So those
and
are
so,
ways. Yeah. So
yeah.
dreams and then kind of compulsions, or when it's like things may not be going. And when are the ways where you're like, that's just a story. Shut, move it up, sister, because this is me, CJ. I'm obseverating just about a story. When do you know if you're on, I guess, the downsides of self analysis and being narcissistic?
hmm Well, sometimes it's tempting to ruminate, right?
Right.
If we're struggling to feel into something more fully,
Mm-hmm.
and this is usually true of anything powerful like grief or mourning, or rage, depending on our personality. Sometimes there's a protective function that involves a lot of rethinking, a loop, a story loop. And as much as that story can drive us crazy because nobody likes to ruminate, it does have a protective function.
Mm.
It's trying to prevent us from actually directly feeling into what we're carrying in our mind and our heart.
Mm. So even rumination is okay because it's kind of, it's processing, haven't concluded yet, processing. So that's okay even according to a therapist, but then would a Buddhist say the same thing?
Well, I think both Buddhists and therapists would encourage people to see what it's like to drop below any story loop and try to access, whether it's through the body. The body is really helpful because often we're carrying so much feeling somatically. And if we're not able to connect with it mentally, often we can notice the gripping in the solar plexus or the tension in the jaw. Mm-hmm. And then use the body as a way to open to really strong feelings that might feel very, very threatening to open up.
Okay, got it. So I'm starting to get my little algorithm in my computer-like brain. So, computing.
Good algorithm.
Yeah, computing, ruminating, computing. Okay, so I'm getting a sense that so if you've gone too far on this spiritual bypass, if you are having addictions, if your dreams are you're having vivid dreams that are trying to tell, your unconscious is telling you like, hello, stop what you're doing. You need to like stop and go into this individuated point and understand more deeply. Addictions, dreams, a felt sense in your body. You wake up every day with kind of like a tight jaw. This is my thing, tight jaw. Or you have strong emotions. I go over to my kid and I'm like, shut up! It's like, okay, that seems like a little bit over the top. What's that all about? So those are kind of symptoms that something is boiling over on the inside. And even though you keep on trying to take the spiritual bullet train upwards, that it's like, maybe not, you need to dive into the psychotherapy part of it.
Yeah, and one of the beauty of clinicians who understand and appreciate spirituality is that it might not be a matter of having to set aside one's spiritual practice so much as just noticing how we're using it. Mm-hmm. Are we using it to get distance from trauma or from some difficult circumstance that we're struggling to work out, and can we be curious about that? Mm-hmm. Just notice it with as little judgment as possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. So this is the whole idea of this. Is that what you describe as a spiritual bypass?
Yeah, and in my experience, everybody has some experience with spiritual bypassing, including extremely evolved spiritual teachers, because the psyche is so complex, the human condition is so complex, that it's tempting to try to get a little bit of distance from certain parts of what we go through, and to do that through meditation, right? To do it through prayer, which doesn't mean that that's the only thing we're doing with our spiritual life. We might also really be dropping into very deep places, and it might be incredibly healing. But it's helpful just to be aware of the different ways we relate to our spiritual practice.
So what are things that, so I also have a spiritual practice where I've gone, and my practice is not Buddhism, but I've been diving in a little bit into Shaivism, which is using Kundalini energy to just kind of, it's like the rotor-rooter. If you're like, oh, you've got issues, it just cleans them all out.
I like the way that sounds.
Yeah, but here's the problem: it's it's a combination of, it's like a boiling, like the pot is boiling, and while it's boiling, you're like, shut up, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I have to go and journal and contemplate what is happening to CJ on this meditation retreat, where I'm like, I hate him, she's irritating, stop it, it's like, why, there's this kind of dualistic feeling of hatred and love at that same exact moment. I love you and I hate you at this exact same moment. So I've had that kind of practice where I'm not doing psychotherapy, but yet it is because I have that kind of, I don't have that background, but I've had so much I've had that much kind of analysis of myself and staring at my belly button that I can kind of go, what's up with that, CJ? Why do you hate that person? Why do you hate that person so much? So that kind of happens. But is that what happens for most people when they go on spiritual? I don't know if that's what happens or if that happens for me because I have this background. What do you think happens when people are in these retreats? They have the spiritual, bypass. They meditate for 7 days. Like I've seen crazy stuff in meditation retreats where some people go AWOL, man.
Sure, it can happen.
Yeah, so what do you think is happening in that case when you have bypassed these things? What's the risk?
Well, from what I've experienced and observed when people go on retreat, which is often very powerful, much more powerful than most people would initially anticipate, they're basically confronting themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Without distraction, without the 1,000 ways we normally can pull ourselves out of having a look at our own shadow, right? And our own struggles and our own incredible capacities or untapped gifts, right? There's just a lot of hidden content. And part of what makes retreats so powerful is it's much harder to run away from all of that feeling and content and energy, including the anger, right? And so you're very, very aware when you're sitting on a cushion in a meditation hall, spontaneously feeling rage for the person who's snoring behind you. Right. Whom you haven't spoken with and know nothing about.
Right.
So you really have to have a look. What's in this rage?
Yeah.
But not everybody is ready to have such a direct exploration of certain feelings or certain memories. And so what can happen is we either dissociate or just try to pull ourselves out by going into a blissed out or a zoned out state. Or we might get stuck in it. We might ruminate about turning around and shaking the guy.
Like, shut up!
Right, I'm trying to achieve enlightenment and you're snoring. And so the challenge is how to stay with what's arising internally with a lot of curiosity and to notice the judgments, since we all have them, and patiently learn more.
I think that's the hard thing because I don't know if everyone wants to do that, right? It's all these experiences, what I'm hearing you say, it's revelatory, right? What it reveals you may be like, ew, look how ugly you are, CJ. You're like, okay, let's put that one done. I'm a beautiful angel. I'm hearing spirits and I saw the universe. It's like, I like this book. Start reading this book. I mean, it's revelatory in both of these directions. So I think it's very easy to go like, that's the ugly CJ. Goodbye. This is I'm an angel talking to spirits and I'm part of the universe. It's like, that's beautiful. And I want to turn towards this and turn away from that. So I think I guess that's the risk when you're at these retreats, is that it could be, it's wonderful, or like, I hate myself. No one wants to go on a 7-day silent retreat and be like, I am an odious, awful person. And that's what I discovered.
Right? The self-loathing can really bubble to the surface.
Yes, or lack thereof of self-love, and then what do? You've gotten like a revelatory, you've got illumination and revelation, but you're like, that's not what I wanted to reveal and illuminate. Right. What does one do after going to one of these spiritual retreats where you just feel unglued as a result of that?
Well, one possibility is to bring that experience to a therapist who genuinely respects and appreciates how complex spirituality is. and how it can stir up a lot of strong psychological content and have a place where it can be explored. Because what often happens, less so in Western communities, Western spiritual communities, because often the teachers are either clinicians or they're just psychologically oriented. So often they're pretty good at appreciating that their spiritual students are dealing with psychological matters.
Right.
But historically, what's happened is people go on spiritual retreat, a whole lot of psychological content comes up, they bring it to their Buddhist teacher, and the Buddhist teacher responds with spiritual guidance. And so
and what would the spiritual guidance sound like?
See what it's like just to notice the rage, notice you want to throttle your mother.
Right.
Or notice the fantasy of picking up the hatchet. And then see what it's like not to follow it. Right? Your mind is generating the fantasy.
Right.
And this is a mental habit. So in other words, they're getting spiritual instruction about a psychological experience.
Okay.
And what my colleagues and I try to do, my Buddhist clinician colleagues try to do is just hold a big frame with our patients to really have a look at what's coming up for them in their spiritual practice that we could get to know better. Work through.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to go on the flip side because I feel I'm actually demonstrating my own bias because I honestly is that I've seen a lot of people who I'm like, you got to go to psychologists. Like, enough with this meditation stuff. Go see somebody. Okay, so let's actually take someone. Let's go. And I actually don't even know what the opposite side is. But tell me what you view as, since you are looking at the balance of these two things. What are some wonderful things that a spiritual practice does that, like, that's not a psychotherapeutic. This is a spiritual issue. Tell me a little bit about that. And I don't even know what questions to ask because I'm biased, frankly.
I am too, so I appreciate you just knowing. However, one of the interesting things that can happen in psychotherapy is that people do bring spiritual matters, right? They bring existential matters, their relationship to death and dying, right? This is a spiritual matter, right? Also to the quest for meaning, for this fulfillment, not just survival, right? Not just tolerating struggle, but deepest fulfillment, which I think is a basic human need. Right. Doesn't matter how much deprivation we're dealing with on a concrete level. It is a basic human need, a sense of meaning. And back in the day, the existential analysts understood this and we're trying to actually create more space in a traditional therapy to talk about these existential matters. And one of the things that I try to do is more directly explore with my patients that these are very human experiences that we can certainly explore and can also be supported in spiritual community, right? That sanghas and temples, spiritual communities often are much better at holding the space for people who are grappling with major loss or radical change or feelings of extreme aloneness.
Yeah. Okay. So now I get it. Because when my dad died, I was working a job that all of a sudden felt meaningless. And I thought, I have a destiny. And if I stay here in this job, I'm like a lobster in a boiling pot. Soon I will be served for dinner. Like I'm not really doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And if I don't move ahead, I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to get where I'm supposed to go, even though, who knows? I've even changed my thought of destiny. But at the time, and this is like 20 years ago, that's what I thought. And I went to a psychotherapist, and she was like, great, why don't you take the Myers-Briggs and do, and I was like, okay, is this how I find my meaning? And so I went through and did all of those kinds of things. And at the end, I just felt like I'd been processed like a little, like piece of paperwork, like here's the 4 pieces of paper. Now go figure out your meaning. And I just thought, what? Like, this is not helping. And it was not until I found someone who was a spiritual coach and I found that kind of community, or at least help, that I needed, because she had both the frame, like yourself, she had the frame of psychoanalytical background as well as a spiritual background to be able to look at that question that I was bringing in and be able to like merge those two things in the answer. So I get it. So I can see how psychotherapy, like she would ask like, well, tell me about your mom. I'm like, what? What does this have to do about my destiny? Like, what? Like, I don't want to dig into these things. This is not part of my journey. I don't get it. Whereas I could see I had a goal and I was moving towards a goal, and I would come up with a belief that wasn't helpful. And then I would go to my spiritual coach, and then we would approach it, and then discover that it was related to my mom. But then it was like we're moving and with kind of energy, psychology, and moving it along. So I can see how traditional psychotherapists may not be able to handle those spiritual questions. That's good.
Yeah, yeah. Often if they haven't had their own personal exploration of spirituality, the whole clinical endeavor can get too reduced, right? Because people come into therapy really needing to crack things open and do some deep sea diving, even if they have parts that say don't go there, there's nothing good that can come from it. Ultimately, we need to mine those depths, right? And we need a sense of our own spirituality in order to feel well. And it can be hard to find that space if a therapist has no personal relationship to their own spirituality.
Yeah, I can see that. So I want to ask them, I could go 2 directions and I don't know which way to go. Okay, because I'm like, oh, if I'm a clinician, I want to ask all these clinical questions. And then there's part of me that wants to know more about you. I'm so confused. Okay, do you have a preference on where we go? Because I just don't know where to go. I have a bunch of personal questions I want to ask you about. You talk about story writing. And then I also want to talk about, there's this whole structure. Okay, I'm going to talk about the structure, and I hope to have more time to talk to you about I hope we have enough time to talk about the other. There's kind of spiritual models, and then there's psychological models. There's people I talk to that talk about the spirit, and then the soul, and you're talking about the psyche. In your mind, having looked at both of these things, how would you describe what is spirit, soul, and psyche?
It's a good question, and I would say psyche is the mind. That includes both the conscious part of the mind that we can reflect upon and talk about and write about, and the unconscious part of the mind that shows up in our dreams and our symptoms and eruptions of strong feeling. Some people would say psyche is also soul, and it depends on your beliefs and your experience. I'm still learning about what soul is, in part because of my own spiritual experience as a Buddhist.
Right.
But spirit, I experience as being the part of our being that is able to transcend the grip of self. Part of our being that feels intimately in connection with a larger reality beyond oneself.
So I'm still figuring out my soul piece, myself. I'm asking you because I don't know the answer. So I'm hoping, what have you found out so far? I mean, what did you, so far you have like a clear definition of psyche, you have a clear definition of spirit, and your soul is kind of like, I'm still evolving. So based on Buddhism, what would you say is your evolving sense about it, or at this moment, which I know is still evolving?
I find that I connect more with the experience of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And it might just have to do with my relationship to the Buddha Dharma, how resonant it feels. I'm very influenced by people in other faith traditions. One of my primary analytic mentors, Anne Ulanov, is an Episcopalian, and another mentor is Paul Knitter, who was a great Catholic priest and then became a Zen teacher. And I think for them, although I don't want to be reductive because they would say something else, soul might be that part that is in conversation with the divine.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Oh, that just almost makes me cry. That's beautiful. Uh, okay, because even my felt sense about this is sometimes spirit wants something, and my soul is like, no, wait a second. Like, I don't, and I don't even know if it's that my soul, is it my psyche? I'm not even sure what's protesting, but there's this kind of, go do this, CJ. It's your divine good, and I'm like, ah, you know what? Oh, okay. Well, what? There's this kind of dance between soul and spirit, and I'm not sure how one dances. I mean, how have you done your own personal dance between navigating your soul and the desire to tell the story and to be part of your individuated experience with this dance with the collective? How have you been able to navigate that?
Mm-hmm. Well, one idea that I have found to be really helpful is this notion that we have multiplicity. We
Mm-hmm.
have many aspects of our being, many parts, if you will, many layers, and that part of being human and part of well-being is the fluidity of relationship between these parts or these facets of our being. And I know that there are times when it can feel extremely weird to go from being in a place of openness and luminosity and receptivity to suddenly being in a really anxious or terrified or alienated place. And this notion of multiplicity has been helpful for me, just personally and as a therapist, for making more room for the fullness of what we experience.
Hmm. So when you experience that, and I'm actually mapping it to my model, which is they talk about tattvas in I guess I don't know, it's a Shaivite tradition, but they talk about 37 levels of consciousness from sensual, sensory feelings to, and then there's this whole model that goes, but it is a multiplicity of different consciousnesses, right? There's CJ who's only conscious of like, I feel like I fell down today and I hurt my arm, and that's like one level of consciousness, right? Which is divine, just as much as CJ, got some like incredible belief about something from doing his meditation, also being with one, that's also divine. Is that what you mean, or what did you mean by that when you said the multiplicities? What does that mean for you in a experiential sense?
Well, one way to understand it is that we are all the ages we have ever been. So we
Mm.
really do have parts that
Mm-hmm.
have the needs and the experience of all these different developmental stages. And we have some extraordinarily developed parts. I sometimes think of these parts as Buddha nature or deepest essence. But we also have very young, I would say even infantile parts that are just filled with need, devouring
Mm.
need for immediate gratification.
Right.
and then everything in between.
Okay.
And this is true, I want to suggest humbly, even of extremely developed spiritual mentors. They also have younger parts. And children also have very developed parts.
Mm,
It's
mm-hmm.
really just a matter of finding ways to appeal to the fullness of who people are.
Ah,
Allow, right, allow for the childlike parts of our spiritual teachers and allow for the wisdom in children.
mm. I get it. So it's embrace them all, you know. So when I
Yeah,
fall, it's like, oh, it's okay, honey. You know, treat me like I was 2 years old, who my mom
yeah,
didn't properly acknowledge my boo boos. I'll do. It's
right.
okay, honey. You fell down and hurt your hand, or you know, like that kind of thing. So know that
Yes.
these multiplicities of parts could be happening at any given moment. And it's
Mhm.
all okay because it's all consciousness. In my model, I'd say it's all consciousness. And these are all wonderful parts of yourself that are showing up, and love them all because it's all beautiful, right? Instead of going, why is that little, why are you crying? Shut up, move on.
Yes.
Move up to the spiritual part. It's okay. You aren't your body. It doesn't matter that you you have pebbles in your knee. You know that
Yes.
kind of thing. I like
That's
that.
right, TJ. And this is it's a critical point in therapy. It's one of the themes that I tried to explore in the book is that often when we suffer, there's a critical part that
Mm,
shames us for it.
mm-hmm.
Even if it's benign suffering, like falling and having a little boo-boo, that there
Right.
might be a part that says, you klutz, look out where you're going.
Yeah.
Right, but that critical part, Freud would call it a harsh superego. I would
Yeah.
call it a critical protector part. It generates all the secondary suffering of the shame and the
Mm,
humiliation. And so
mm.
part of a healing process in therapy is finding ways to just assuage the anxiety of the critical part so that people can actually get to know how they have suffered and get to know how they might have not lived as fully as they're able to.
Right, right. That's a beautiful thing. I love the idea of the secondary suffering that just so perfectly states what that critical part of me does. And not to be critical of the critical part and then cause tertiary suffering. Third
We
levels
can
of.
just proliferate and develop a whole lot of suffering
Yeah,
endlessly.
exactly. But I see that. Okay, so the last question is karma. So, how do you think about karma? And I'm not even sure what I'm asking, but I do feel like it's popping up whenever I see these things. So let's say that you have a soul, and the soul is supposed to be experiencing this multiplicity of experiences, including some evolution of my soul, which is I assume is karma, right? So how does that, how in your mind, how do you reconcile karma with like these are my personal experiences, my individuated story, my soul's evolution to a spiritual path? Like how does it all fit in your model?
Mhm. One way I work with karma is that it is cause and effect, and we can use karma theory to be more curious about our experience.
Mm,
And as a clinician, I would translate karma as deep curiosity for the initial cause of what we're now experiencing.
mm,
And the historical Buddha talked about this so eloquently that it's really tempting when we're going through anything difficult to get fixated on the difficulty, on
mm-hmm,
the very particular ways we suffer. But the more we can connect with a curious part that is more interested in what happened before the suffering,
mm,
what were the conditions that set the stage for those struggles, that pain, that
mm,
difficulty? Then there's real opportunity to not only have insight, but to generate real compassion,
mm, mm-hmm,
right?
mm,
Real compassion for what someone has gone through.
Yeah, beautifully. That was oh my gosh. This is just, I feel like I have all these like scattered little quilt pieces that you just so deftly sewed together. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, CJ. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, this is really wonderful. We've been talking to Heal a Wounded Heart with Dr. Pilar Jennings. Tell us about your website if people want to find out more about your book and your practice.
Sure, it's drpilarjennings.com, and I would be happy to hear from readers, and look forward to being in conversation with them and with you again, CJ.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.